Welcome to DubLife Diaries, the podcast where passion meets the open road. I'm Joe Person, your host and also a lifelong dubber. Buckle up because this ride is just beginning. This podcast is sponsored by Volksmania magazine. Good times, great cars, awesome Volksmaniacs. Visit Volksmania.com to learn more about this class-leading VW magazine. All right, welcome back to DubLife Diaries. Today we've got a guest whose Volkswagen obsession started before he could even talk. Matt Gardner grew up loving air-cooled VWs, became a mechanic, worked at a VW shop, and has owned some incredible Beetles and Combis along the way. These days, he drives a train. That's right, he's a locomotive driver. How cool is that? But the VW passion has never left. We're going to dig into his journey. Might talk a little bit about his collection and hear some wild stories from Matt from the road. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe. How you going?
Hey, man. How am I going? I'm going great. Excellent. I love that this podcast is bringing together people like you and me. But before we dive into today's episode, I do want to give just a couple shout outs to a sponsor. Volksmania magazine issue number 22 is going to be out on shelves here in the coming days. Make sure that you're using DubLife 10 at checkout for 10% off your first issue. Shout out real quick to my buddy Dino Styles from Dino's Garage in DC Metro area. Just want to say thank you so much for your support, Dino. Now, Matt, back to you. You emailed me several weeks ago and you said, hey, man, I'm so happy to see and hear about this podcast. It's crazy to hear how much of a similarity there is between Australia and the U.S. as far as air-cooled culture goes. My first response is, well, hey, the podcast is all about celebrating the people of the VW culture. So do you want to come on the show? And you say, I'm a little concerned. I'm not that interesting. And I say, all right, well, shoot me some info on you and we'll make that determination. I bet you are. I said it. I bet you are.
I remember.
Yeah. So yeah, man, you sent me your background and your bio, and what? You're super interesting. In fact, you're exactly what I'm looking for. Because here's the thing: I made this podcast to celebrate guys, girls, people like you. I don't care where you're located, right? Because this culture it runs deep. Little German cars. But behind every VW fan, to me, is going to be their cars. It's going to be some really cool stories. It's going to be their buses or their combis. It's going to be their family. It's going to be their life and what they do. And that's what I did this for, because I feel like every person I've met along the way, I've had air-cooled Volkswagen since high school. I'm 47 years old, so give you a little age there. But everybody I've met along the way, they got a couple of things. Smiles and stories, and they're always interesting people. They say birds of a feather flock together. So, man, I'm just excited for this opportunity. But here's my point that I wanted to make by saying all that. This podcast is for you. It's for people like you. So just like you went to the website and you said, click here to register a guest or register as a guest, and you filled out that information, I want to address the listeners that are tuning in right now. You do the same thing, because y'all got some really cool stories to tell, and I'm here to show those stories off. So log into the website, DubLifeDiaries.com. Up top, it says register a guest. If you or anybody else living the dub life wants to get down, come on. Just like Matt did. And thank you, sir. All right.
No worries. Let's face it, we all love talking V-dubs. So
yeah, awesome. This is going to be great. So let's rewind it back to the beginning for you. Your parents showed you the love bug when you were just 18 months old. There's no way. I
believe so. Yep.
Remember that far back, but
no.
Right. But what was the moment that you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that VW was imprinted in you?
I don't remember. For me, they've just always been there. Mum tells me that, if they needed to settle me or needed me not to move, the love bug was put on and I didn't move, As a kid, I remember you'd be driving down the road and we used to play Spotto. I've got two younger sisters, and we used to sit there and play Spotto, and felt each other up in the back seat of the car while we were driving along. We lived some distance from Melbourne for a little while. So originally from Melbourne, but lived in Albury-Wodonga, which is about 3.5 hours away. So lots of car trips and lots of bruised arms. We got banned from playing Spotto because we were belting each other up so much. And then I think we invented slap van, which was, find a combi. But even, I ran into my uncle's ex-wife in the supermarket yesterday, and she told me, I'd forgotten all about this, that there was some family friend that turned up at my grandparents' when I was very young, of 5 or 6. I vaguely remember this, and I got all excited because they were in a Beetle, and they took me out and showed me the Beetle, and I think it was the first time he sat in one or went for a ride in one, and so they've always been there ever since that love bug was shown to me, and it's just never changed. As I got older, I sort of read books, and Dad would say, "Hey, what year's that?" And I'd go, "Oh, it's a 72 because of this, 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 and this." And in Australia, we're slightly different with stuff, but yeah, we were able to sit there and figure them out. And Dad thought it was hilarious. And I remember I've got a photo that Mum took when I was very young. We went to the Royal Melbourne Show, and I don't know if Dad did it on purpose or not, but we parked next to this 1500 Beetle. And I dove out and said, "Herbie, Herbie, Herbie," and had to have a photo with it. So, yeah, they've just always been there. And I don't know where it came from. It's just the moment it was put on, I didn't move.
Something I hear a lot from, true enthusiasts, guys like you, is similar stories just like this. They don't remember when they were bit by the bug, but it happened. And, that's their life. And another question I had that you kind of already answered was, you were the kid that was pointing them out, pointing them out.
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I see that passion in you. I knew, and I say this to guests that come on all the time, I knew there was going to be more, because everybody says that, oh, it's no big deal. It's just that, man, you got a lifetime with these cars. You're an ex-VW mechanic. You drive a damn train. Like, that's pretty
so much
cool,
similarities between VWs and trains, but yeah. It is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. So I heard that you used to follow around one of your high school teachers just to talk about your collection. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that? What was that about?
So he drove it would have been similar to what I've got now, a highlight bay window microbus. He drove it to school, had some mag wheels on it, driving lights on the front. And he was just someone that I gravitated to because of that Volkswagen connection. So whenever I had a break, I'd search him out. His name was Ron Donahue, and his nickname among the students was Rondon. And so I'd follow Rondon all around, and we just talk Volkswagens. He actually took me to the first Volkswagen show I ever went to, which was Day of the Volkswagen, which is still going here in Victoria. It's, Victoria's largest show and probably my favourite show, but I'm a little bit biased being a Victorian. And yeah, he took me in his microbus when I would have been 14, I suppose, and drove down to Melbourne to go to the car show. So yeah, he was a really big influence on me. He was one of sort of two people in that time that took the kid that was obsessed with Herbie and started to point it in the direction of more just Volkswagens in general. So he was awesome. And I ended up buying my first car off him, the first driving car I got.
Yeah. So we're going to touch on that. Any other cars in his collection that you remember?
So he had the microbus, he had the Beetle I ended up buying, and then there was a third car. And I remember it being up on blocks. It was a 6-volt Beetle, but I think the dash had been modified, like had a whole lot of gauges. And I think his original plan was he was going to modify it or something. And I don't think it ever happened. I think it ended up being sold. But yeah, that was it. He only had a small collection. He only had sort of the 3. But was someone who'd always loved them. And he wanted to, I was mortified when he told me. I couldn't believe it as someone that loved original stuff back then. He was going to wanted to put a Porsche motor in his combi, because he was someone who went skiing a lot up at Mount Buffalo, and he felt the combi was just a little bit underpowered. Whereas with a Porsche motor in it, it would have gone really well, he thought. So yeah, I can remember doing Outdoor Ed with him, and we'd be just walking along, bushwalking and talking Volkswagens. That was pretty cool.
Now, that wasn't your first Beetle. Came when you were, what, 12, 13? You said it was the parts
Something
car.
like that.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So
Is that this one?
the one I've got now.
No, no,
Sorry.
no. Is that the one you got from the teacher, or is that the
No,
64?
no, that's so the 64 was from the school teacher. I actually don't remember how it came about that I bought it off him. I remember I paid $300 Australian for it, and we took it down to Melbourne. With that car, I used to actually my mum's dad driveway was fairly long in Albury Wodonga. It was about 4 car lengths long. So I used to, when they went out, without telling them, I'd jump in and move the Beetle backwards and forwards, and sort of taught myself how to deal with the clutch and how to steer a little bit. And before I was even legally allowed to drive, but yeah, the parts car that you're referencing was a family friend I don't know if it was out of the blue or if it was organised, because obviously I was fairly young. And I still remember this night, they rang up mum and dad and said, listen, we've got this Beetle. We want to get rid of it. We'd like to give it to Matt, knowing he's obsessed. Are you happy with that? And then I remember dad hanging up and turning and saying to me, you've been given a Beetle. And I remember going, oh, excuse me a minute. And I ran down the other end of the house and just screamed in happiness. Yeah. And so then dad and his friend, whose father had given us the car, went out with a trailer. I can't remember how long after, and we picked up this car. It was sitting in a paddock at their farm in a place called Jinderah in southern New South Wales, just over the border, and put it on the onto the trailer and dragged it back. But while we were there, we looked at this other car, which was the car that they bought it for. They'd had a little bit of a fender bender in this 59 Beetle, and used this other car that they'd given me to sort of get the parts they needed to straighten it all out. And that was a very cool car. And even at 12, I looked at it and thought, wow, this is nice and original. It's a great little car. And I kind of embarrassed here, but even at 12 or 13, I looked at them and said, oh, if you're ever going to sell it, let me know. I'll buy it. And they just laughed. And then, so we dragged that home. Unfortunately, that car never sort of had anything done to it. It sort of sat in our backyard. And then when we moved back to Melbourne, I had the 2 Beetles. I had the school teacher Beetle and I had this 58 model Beetle. And dad said, I'm not taking 2 cars to Melbourne. We can only afford to take one. You got to pick one. And so the 64 sort of had to be the one that went to Melbourne. So that 58 model got passed on to someone else, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Year.
It's a great year. I love it. It's, you've got
was it the same there for just the 58 and 59 were the only
slightly different in that you guys had some indicators. You had those little bullet indicators on the guards, whereas we didn't have that. We had the same as the ovals with still the semaphore indicators. So just those little semaphores poking out, and that was it for indicators. But otherwise, pretty much everything else, that sort of
only
quite a bat wing
though for that model.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. So first is the big back window. So they got the big back window. They've got the new 6-volt dash, but all oval running gear, the 36 horsepower, the crash box. Yeah. So very cool.
I had a 58. It was beautiful. I say this a lot, but I feel like, I feel like that's the one that got away sometimes.
Yeah.
I just do it. It was a beautiful car, but I had other opportunities and other visions for other things. And I really wanted to, I love the way that the thing looks, the Type 181.
Yeah, they're cool.
When they're lowered and the windshield's down and the top's back and you're slammed and you're kind of low riding / beach cruising. I really like that vibe.
Yeah.
And so I had to get one. So I
hear you.
I got a 74. So, I'm kind of, I couldn't do that in my Beetles over the years. Like it really feels good driving that thing. But anyhow. So again, back to the 64. The 64 was your first proper driving one that came
correct,
after, right?
That's right. It was the second Beetle I owned. And that was when we moved back to Melbourne. I left school not long after and started my apprenticeship. So, and once I started working as a mechanic, that was when I could I'd already started, like I played is probably the best way to put it, with the 58 and done little jobs, but nothing major. But once I started to learn what to do, that was when I started to really work on cars. And we got the 64 on the road. I remember it had rust where they all go in the battery tray. And I remember the mechanics at the workshop said, look, you don't want to weld it. And I'm not going to mention which workshop this is because this is very dodgy and they'd be upset with me. But they said, look, don't bother paying someone to weld it up. You haven't learned how to weld yet. Just get a bit of metal, grab some pop rivets, pop rivet it through the floor, and then get that tar paint and just tar over the top. And then no one will know. So all we did was Dad and I sat there with this metal plate and pop riveted this metal plate into the battery tray and chucked it in. I remember, I think one of the headlights stopped working on the way for the. So over here, you got to get what's called a roadworthy, and then you've got to take it into Vic Roads for an inspection when it's been off the road. They check the engine numbers and the chassis number, make sure it all matches. Sure. And yeah, I remember going into Vic Roads and something stopped working, and Dad's like, Matt, you got to fix these things, because I didn't have my license when we first got it registered. And then learned to drive a little bit in it and drove it for a little while, but not long after I got it. It was Easter and we had some friends down from Wodonga staying with us, and we went for a drive to the video shop in those days and hired some videos. Yeah, Blockbuster Video Easy was another one over here. And driving back, it spat a plug out of number 3, I think. Just shot the plug, the thread went. And that meant that we had to put a helicoil in and fix it, which is no big deal. But Mum and Dad were like, no, it's not reliable. You need a better car. You're going to have to get a better car. So I never got rid of that 64, or I didn't get rid of it for a long time. But I probably one thing I sort of really regret. I try not to regret much, but yeah, I went and bought something different. Still a Beetle, but a different Beetle, rather than, I probably should have just put the money into that Beetle and fixing it. But instead I was told I had to get another car, so I got another Beetle, which was a 73 Outback. One owner, really neat car, but not what I wanted. I love 6-volt Beetles, and yeah, it was a cool car, but I didn't keep it too long before that went and. Oh, that was when I sold that because I discovered combis and felt I needed a combi in my life.
No, so that conversation's coming after. Let me just touch on one thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like right here is where the wrenching also just may have started, right? Were you?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, always mechanically inclined, guys like early on, right? You're good at.
Yeah. As a kid.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. As a kid, I'd get my toy cars and pull them apart and put them back together again. And, love Lego and sitting and building stuff out of Lego. And so, yeah, it was always sort of hands-on stuff. Yeah. My dad's a carpenter by trade. So, Dad was always fixing the house. So I've since discovered I'm not so good at that, but I'm okay with a car.
We're doing the thing on your cars then. As soon as you
that's right.
They'd have issues. You were doing it yourself. You were fixing it.
Correct. Yep. As I was learning as an apprentice, that translated into me doing stuff on my own cars and keeping them on the road, servicing them, doing whatever needed to be done. So doing road trips in them and then breaking down and what have you. So yeah, it was always there. And as I did my apprenticeship and gained those skills, that was when I did more and more. So yeah. And really, like that 64, I learned a fair bit on it. And the 73 too, that L-Bug, there were lots of little things that went on that you started to learn.
Right. Yeah. So for a while, I know you were all about the Beatles. Now we'll jump into the combi conversation. One night after a club meeting, a VW club meeting for you guys, someone hands you the keys to a freshly restored 65 split window. Talk to me a little bit about that. What happened there that night that changed and made you the buses?
So we'd all gone to the club meeting, and we're, as you do it, I'm sure it happens where you guys are. After the club meeting, you're all out kicking the tires and talking smack and having a bit of fun. And I remember that Andrew had just finished what he calls Red Bus, and he's like, Matt, combis are better. I'm like, nah, Beetles are better. No, combis are better. And I'm like, no, give me a Beetle any day. He says, here, take Red Bus for a drive. And so me and another club member jumped in this bus, and we only went around. We're at a pub over the other side of town, and we just sort of drove around the car park at the pub. So I didn't get out of second gear. Okay. But it instantly fell in love. Like I was like Will Smith in Independence Day. I gotta get me one of these. Like it was just the way a splitty, like people say to me, "Oh, what's so good about split screen combis?" I go, "Well, they don't go, they don't stop, and they don't corner." And that's what I love about them. Like, they're just awesome. And then the way that, you accelerate and they lift, in the arse end when they've still got the reduction boxes in them, they're such a cool thing.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, I instantly fell in love with a split window combi, to the point that I think it may have even been the next day that L-Bug went on the market to sell it. Like, it was that quick a decision. It's like, right, because I still had the 64 at that stage. And the plan was that the 64 was going to be eventually restored when funds allowed. And so the L-Bug was just a daily driver. It's like, well, I can get rid of that and I can buy a combi and drive the combi every day. And so, yeah, the L-Bug went up for sale. It took me forever to sell the L-Bug because I paid too much for it at the time and I was trying to recoup some of that money back.
Sure.
So it took a long time to find a buyer. And it was in that time that split screen combis went up in value ridiculously over here. I think the guys in the UK, some guys in the US, I think as well, found that, but particularly the UK, because of that right-hand drive market, they found that Australia was a good dry environment to get split screen combis, and they just shot up. And they were, within 6 months, they were out of my price range. I did find one, and I remind my dad of this all the time and stir him up. And it was sitting just down the road from where I live now in a place called Selby. It was $2,500, this split screen combi, and I hadn't sold the L-Bug yet. And it wasn't a bad bus. It just had little rust bubbles in the nose, but otherwise a pretty good, it would have easily passed a roadworthy and been drivable. And so I said to Mum and Dad, listen, I haven't sold my car yet. Can I borrow the money and I'll pay you back? Oh, no, we haven't got the money. And then, yeah, by the time the L-Bug had gone, splitties were just unattainable. And then they haven't stopped going up until probably, the last 6 months. I think they've dropped a little bit here, but they're still well out of where I can justify spending.
Yeah.
Especially with a family.
Especially for the good German ones, I think the Brazilian market, even that has inflated pretty high, but I think through the Brazilian market, you could still get one for a lot less.
Here, left-hand drive ones are a bit cheaper too. But yeah, I'd still probably prefer a right-hand drive one if I was going to get one.
Sure.
But yeah, they're just crazy money, really, for what they are.
I know.
As cool as they are.
I know.
They're just crazy.
There's such a market there, even for
100%.
the non VW people that want to get in, classic cars or whatever. That's like still a choice, a very very high on the list. Even for non VW. But back to this 65. This was the same combi that ended up in your wedding?
It was, yeah. So back in those days, I was very active within the Volkswagen Club here, the Volkswagen Club of Victoria.
Okay.
And so there were times where when I went away, I would often go with the car club going away. I'd go with those guys, with the Ermel family. And those guys, they were great to me. And I'd often be traveling with Andrew in Redbus. And there were times where I'd travel on my own in Redbus. I'd drive Redbus and they'd be somewhere else. And we did a trip to Tasmania for I think it was the 50th anniversary of Volkswagen in Australia. And some of that trip I spent with Andrew in his 52 Schwitter, the split window bug that's got the oval dash. He's got one of those. So we spent some time driving in that. And then the rest of the time was me driving Redbus as well. We sort of floated between all the cars, all of us. And so I spent a lot of time in Redbus with Andrew. We were saying before about how they don't stop, they don't corner, and they don't go. Well, we were on a road here in Melbourne called the Western Ring Road. It's a notorious road, lots of accidents. And we're driving along the ring road. I can't remember where we were going or where we were coming from, but some dude had all these pallets in a trailer, and the pallets started falling out of the trailer. And I'm in the splitty. I'm driving. Andrew's sitting next to me, and I'm trying to, with this splitty, go round all these falling pallets.
Oh,
and trying to stop as well. And of course, with that 4-wheel drum brake, no booster, and I'm only a little bloke. I'm a skinny little runt, and just about standing on the brake pedal trying to get it to stop.
Wow.
So when it came time, when Nicole and I got married, we had two 59 Cadillacs as the girls' car. So Nicole was in a 4-door convertible and the girls were in a Coupe de Ville, I think it was. And I said to Nicole, well, I got to have a V-dub. So we said to Andrew, look, could you bring Red Bus? Because obviously I'd spend so much time in Red Bus
Yeah.
that Red Bus was the car. And it worked out really nicely because the two Cadillacs were both red or a very dark pink. So the photos are really cool. You got Red Bus sitting in the background, the two caddies sort of nosing into each other, and then the bridal party in front of all the cars. So it's really cool because cars are a big thing for me. It's like obviously Volkswagens are the ultimate, but I just love anything. Like I love old cars. Like those caddies are a cool thing.
Yeah.
And looking and talking to the guy who owned the business, that was funny too because he had a 59 Beetle was his first car. And so we were comparing notes about how a 59 Cadillac and a 59 Beetle are completely different beasts. And that, the Beetle, you've got a speedo and two idiot lights. The Cadillac, everything's electric. The roof was electric. The seats could be electric. You had air conditioning and just crazy.
Yeah.
Just crazy. Whereas the Beetle, you were lucky you had a seat, really.
No seat belt.
Yeah, that's right.
No seat belt. So once you're hooked, I know you're feeling the combies now, just in the the
Yep.
of life. But we talked about it; they were out of your price range at that. So after months of searching, I know you ended up with a bay window. Tell me a little bit about that bay window and what made you pull the trigger on that one.
Yeah, it was actually quite a few years later too. It was I actually sort of gave up on a combi for a while because initially I didn't want a bay window. Initially, I was I'm a 6-volt guy.
Late adopter.
Yeah, I was. I had that 73 and the padded dash and it's like, they're saying that they're fat chicks and I'm just like, nah, not interested in it's got to be 6-volt stuff. It's got to be 6-volt, And anyway, and I'd started working as a VW mechanic by then. And I remember a very dear friend of mine, Michael, my boss at the time, he saying to me, "Nah, Matt, bay windows, they're awesome." And I'm like, "No." He's like, "No, they are drivable. They're much better than splitties." And it was as I worked at Volkswagen, and we did a lot of bay window services, whether they be campers, microbuses, a few utes, a couple of twin cabs. I started to discover, geez, hang on a minute, these are a cool car. These are a really good car. And so, so then it was a few years. I'm trying to think what happened. That's right. I broke up with an ex-girlfriend and Dad said to me, he said, you know what, you could probably go buy a Statesman, which over here is a Commodore, a long wheelbase Commodore. So I had a breakaway from Volkswagen for a moment. I had a crisis of conscience and went and bought an Australian car and a big luxury car and had that for about 12 months and started seeing my now wife. And that was when I decided, no, I need a combi. It's time. I just left Volkswagen. I'd moved into the railways and thought, no, it's time. So I sold the Statesman. And once the Statesman was sold, I started looking for a bay window. And it took a long time. And it was, again, Andrew. I rang Andrew Ermel in the car club and he was on the committee at the time. And he said, oh, look, this one's come up. And I got into contact with them and said, listen, I've heard you're selling a combi. Yes, yeah. I said, okay. And I think even Michael and Julie had said, oh, this particular one might be coming up. If you hear about it, grab it, because they still owned Volkswagen at the time. And so, when I saw what the car was, I rang them, asked to go see it. And they're like, yes, you can come and look at it, but we've got someone else coming to look over the weekend. Oh. And I went, okay, well, look, I can only, I was at work, started work at like 4:20 in the morning that particular day. It was 9:00. I'd got the email from Andrew saying these are their contact details. So I rang straight away.
Sure.
Organised to go look at it that afternoon. And from the moment I laid eyes on this bus, it was just the outside's been resprayed below the gutters. The roof's still the original paint. And at the time, it was really sweet. It was in really good nick. It was an amazing bus. And then I looked at the interior and it was an incredible combi. Owned by the original owner's daughter. So it was only a 2-owner car. He had a logbook of every time it had been filled up with fuel he picked it up on the 15th of March, 1976. from Leo Motors in Ferntree Gully. And so, yeah, I looked over this thing and it was just too good to pass up. And I had a budget. I had a budget of $10,000 back then. And I knew as soon as I took it for a drive, this bus, I'm like, right, well, it needs a motor. I don't know if you know, with 2-litre combis, the cam gear goes, the rivets go in the cam and they get that really rattly cam noise. It had that. And I thought, okay, well, there's $2,000 for a rebuild I got to knock off. So I think from memory, I offered them 8 on the spot. And they're like, no, we've got this other guy coming to look. We owe it to him. We need to have him look at it first. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. You know, I'd expect that as well. So that was Friday night. And if you ask my now wife, I was like a bear with a sore head all weekend because I'm like, I didn't offer enough money. I want this bus. Oh, man. And then I think it was Monday they rang me. They said, right, the other guys made an offer. I said, oh, no, it's gone. And they said, we're not going to tell you what that offer is. But before we talk anymore, we need to know, what are your plans? And I said, well, it'd be to drive it, just maintain it. Like it's a grouse bus. I just want to enjoy it. It's pure and simple, preserve it. And they went, okay, no worries. Well, we want 8.7 for it. And people always say to me, well, you know, don't let them, I always say to people, sorry, when they're looking at cars, don't let emotion get into it. You know, make sure you keep the emotion out. Well, I let emotion in because I just straight away, I didn't haggle. I just went, yep, no worries. I just bought it. Oh, yep, done. And so then when I picked it up, I went and I said to them, I said, oh, okay, what got me over the line? You know, you said the other bloke had made an offer. Why? How come I got the car? And they said, well, he was a young guy who was going to drive around Australia in it, and that's fine. He was going to pull the interior out and turn it into a camper. And I went, no, you can't do that. This is too good a car. It's everything's there. And they're like, well, what do you think you're getting it?
Awesome.
So, and then years later, I was driving it to work and I pulled into a service station and was getting fuel and filling up with fuel. And it was still my daily driver at the time. And I could hear across the service station, hey, Matt. I'm like, who's that? Who's calling me out? I don't know who you are. Oh, whatever. I kept filling up and she comes up. She goes, you don't remember me, do you? And I go, no, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm the previous owner of the combi. Oh, hi, here you go. So, yeah, she was rapt to see it still on the road at the time. My kids were still quite young, so it had kids' seats in the back, and she was just rapt. Yeah, so.
Sure.
Yeah,
because
it's a
that's
cool
the
bus.
best feeling that could happen to somebody that sells it, and that's what they want. You know, they picked you because you said these were your plans. You know, it's just great. It's great that came back like that. Moving past that, this is where things kind of come back full circle for you in your lifeline.
Yep.
I guess because now you got offered this 59 Beetle years later. And if I remember correctly, you said it turned out to be the same car that was from the very first Beetle that you had when you were 12, 13 that you were supplying parts to, right?
So the first ever Beetle I got, was parts car that they purchased that Beetle to supply parts to this car. So, and there's quite a story to actually how I got it. So every time I ran into the family friend whose father owned the car, I used to say, what's going on with the Beetle? Where's it at? Oh, Noel, his dad's given it to his nephew, to his grandson. They're going to do it up to drive. Okay, cool. No worries. And anyway, I got the first phone call. Matt, Robin, which is the son-in-law of the guy who owned the Beetle, is going to get rid of the Beetle. He's going to call you. Okay, no worries. So he rang up, first phone call, didn't go and look at it or anything. It was just a phone call. Hey, we're selling the Beetle. Okay, no worries. How much do you want? They set a price and it was way too much for what it was, especially at that time. Beetles were still sitting at you could get a really good Beetle really cheap without a problem. And they just wanted too much money. I said, look, the most I could give you for an unregistered car is this. He's like, oh, that doesn't even cover the motor I put in it. I said, well, I'm sorry, that's it. And he's like, no, we'll sell it elsewhere. Okay, no worries. And I said to Nicole, well, that's it. I've lost that car. I'll never get that one. And then it was probably 18 months later, I suppose, maybe 2 years later.
Wow.
This time the actual grandfather rang, the owner of the car rang me and he said, Matt, I want this Beetle gone. And I said, well, no, Robin wants too much for it. I can't afford it. It's out of my price range. He said, nope, I've told him he has to get rid of it and the price has come down. And he distinctly said, I want it to go to you because I know you'll do something with it. And I'm like, okay, all right. Well, I'll call him, but I can't guarantee anything. And so we rang him up and he's like, yeah, no, we want $1,800 for it, I think was the price at the time. I'm like, well, look, it's still a bit dear, but look, I tell you what, we're up that way for Christmas holiday. We'll come up and we'll look at it over Christmas. Yep, done. No worries. So we went and drove up and looked at it. We were camping in a place called Beechworth, which is about an hour and a half from Albury-Wodonga. So the girls went real camping, no toilets, all that sort of stuff. The girls wanted to go into town to do some shopping and visit a real bathroom. So I drove the girls all in, and then I drove out to Gindra to look at the car and looked over it and made an offer. I think I said 1,000, and they came back and they said, 1,200. And I'm like, I said, I need to think about it. And I went back to Nicole. It was a lot rougher than I remembered, the Beetle. Undercoat was starting to show through on the roof. All the seats had started to rip. They pulled the original 36 out and put a 1600 twin port in. They'd put 1500 tail lights on, which looked awful. They hadn't put the little 6-volt lights on. They'd put the big 1500 tail lights, not the elephant's feet, but the ones before the elephant's feet. And I'm like, and I said to them, I said, look, you've done this, you've done this. And so I got back to Nicole and said, I don't know what to do. Because I had a 65 Beetle at the time. The 64 had long gone. Unfortunately, it had rusted away. So I had this 64 Beetle. It was now the plan to restore at some point. And Nicole said, bring Andrew. Talk to Andrew. So I rang again, Andrew Ermel, and I said, Andrew, listen, I've just looked at this car. I don't know what to do. And he goes, well, what is it? I said, it's a 59 Beetle. So it's got the ice pick handles. It's got, this, and this. And that's right. I looked in the back. So I said, have you got the original tail lights? Oh, no. They're long gone. And I saw on the back seat, there was this box under there was a guard. There was a couple of windscreens, a few other bits and pieces in the back. So I lifted up all that stuff and looked in this box, and there's the original tail lights sitting there. So it had the original tail lights. And Andrew said, well, what's it like for rust? And I'd looked at all of the usual spots. I said, it's really good. It's a dry car. It's been up in, he says, buy it. He says, you'd be mad. Get rid of your 65. It's a better car because it's that, as we discussed before, the changeover year. Buy it. And so, yeah, rang him back and said, all right, no worries, 1,200. I went and paid the deposit. On the spot, they gave me the original owner's manual for it. So that's sitting inside. It doesn't sit in the car. That's sitting inside because it's even got fruit fly. So over here, there was fruit fly was an issue, and you had to make sure that you didn't take fruit in certain parts of the country. And all the stickers from back then are still in there, and that from when they used to drive it around the country Victoria and southern New South Wales. So yeah, I was given that straight away, and then went back a couple of months later and picked the car up, borrowed my brother-in-law's Commodore Ute, and drove up to Albury-Wodonga for a wedding, which was actually the granddaughter of the owner's car, as the guy who owned the car. And then, picked the car up and drove it back to Melbourne. So, yeah. And
Amazing
then
story. And again, this is what you get, when you mix an enthusiast with the right timing and opportunity, and
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's a car I'll never get rid of. Like that. All the classics that we've got now will go to my kids eventually, hopefully. So that's the plan. They're not the Beetle particularly. It won't go anywhere. I was after it for too long. There's too much history with it. It's not going anywhere. Yeah. And like I said, I looked at it at 12 and always wanted it.
Yeah, I love it, man. And it came back and it worked.
Yeah. Yep.
So you restored it, right? You did a lot of work to it.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, see, again, it's a bit of a funny story. So we bought our first house. And when we bought our first house, our neighbours next door were talking to us, and they'd seen the Beetle turn up, and I owned a Combi at the time. And, you're into Volkswagens. Oh, Graham over the back. So we've got a double fronted property, and on our back street, Graham's over the road, is into old Volkswagens. He's doing up a Combi at the moment. You should go talk to him. So I went over and I talked to Graham and had a chat with him, and Graham's like, yeah, this is what I'm doing at the moment. He was doing a 75, 76, something like that Combi. Actually, it's I don't know if you saw the photo I sent through, but it's the one that's the blue camper. He was doing that up at the time. And he was respraying it in 2-pack in his shed. And so he was showing me all of that. And as we got to know each other, I turned around and I said, well, what would you charge for a respray? And he's like, and he's, fingers and toes out, and went, about $3,500. I went, okay, no worries, cool. And then I had a combi at the time that I'd bought originally I'd bought it because it was an auto, and I was going to fix the auto so that my wife could have a combi of her own to drive. And the auto wasn't so much the issue. I knew I could get that repaired. But once I got it home and sort of had a look at it, it had lived where we live now in the Dandenong Ranges, but it had never been washed. So the whole bottom 6 inches had all rusted out because they lived on a dirt road, and all the dirt had sat in the sills and everything. So once I got it and I started looking over it, I went, oh, this is a bit too much. But it was still too good a car to wreck for parts.
Sure.
So I decided that I'll sell that and finance painting the Beetle. And anyway, Graham and I got talking. I said, I've got this da-da-da-da-da. And then anyway, and he goes, how much are you asking for the combi? I said, about 3.5. He goes, well, why don't I paint your Beetle? You supply me the Beetle, I'll paint the Beetle, and you give me the combi. And I went, I like this idea. All right, no worries. So that was how the respray came about.
Okay.
Was that and originally when I first did it, my first thought was, I'll just paint the outside. I'll leave the inside. I'll just make the outside look good. And then Graham's like, no. Let's do it properly. Let's pull it off the pan. Let's do it properly. And so, we did that. And then while we were doing that, it's not Volkswagen related, but it's still quite funny, is that combi that he had, he ended up talking to a mate of his. And Graham had finished his combi, and he'd now moved on to a 49 Willys hot rod that he was building. Very cool car. Yeah, cool car. And anyway, this friend of his had a Falcon Ute that had a 253 V8 in it. I think it was a 253. And so he swapped the combi for the running gear of the Ute so that he could get his hot rod going. So no hands had changed, and no money had changed hands, but all these different things had been organised to get all these cars back on the road. So it was pretty cool. And then Graham and I, I stripped the Beetle. We carried the Beetle on he's got a 4x6 trailer. We put the Beetle body on the trailer, I tell a lie, sorry. We rolled the Beetle over with no motor in it, and rolled it over the back, and lifted the body off onto sawhorses in his shed so he could work on the body. And then I rolled the floor pan back home. I got photos of next door's kids sitting on the floor pan, pretending to drive and, rolling it back over to the house, and then stripped it all. Stripped it all out and pour 15'd it and painted all the floor pan up while Graham did the body. So, and then slowly put it back together again.
So I know you mentioned in the timeline, after you had put some work into this Beetle, you said you took it on a pretty massive road trip.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, what was that experience like? How'd the Beetle handle such a long journey?
Well,
2,400 miles.
So before we get there, it was pretty funny how that actually came about too. So one of Nicole's friends was getting married at a place called Fraser Island, which is up in Queensland. And they were getting married. And I said to Nicole, you get sent to save the day. I said, you have to go. It's a good friend of yours. And she said, yeah. She goes, well, I want to take my mum and dad. I'm like, yeah, fair enough. Look after our 2 kids at the time. My eldest he would have been about 3, I suppose. And the middle child would have been about 6 months old. And I said, yeah, no worries. Then they can look after the kids while we go to the wedding. And she goes, yeah, but mum won't fly. And I just started grinning because I knew it meant a road trip. And Nicole's gone, you're not, are you? I went, can I? And she goes, it better get there. It better get there. And anyway, at the time, to paint the picture, the Beetle had just come back from Graham's place. The shell had just been painted. It was back on the floor pan, but it had no guards, no bonnet, no engine lid, no engine. The right gearbox wasn't back in it yet. It was just sitting as a bare shell. And we had 18 months to get this car ready to take to Fraser Island. And yeah, that was the conversation. And I'm like, okay, beauty. Right, let's go. And so it went from let's just slowly put this thing together, take my time, to I've got a timeline now. So the wedding was in February. Our day of the Volkswagen is usually like November, mid to late November. So the original goal was get it to day of the Volkswagen the day before the day of the Volkswagen before the wedding, and then have it ready to drive to Fraser in the February. So the mad rush, got it all back together. I did the hood lining myself with a Wolfsburg West kit, all that sort of stuff. And then found that, pulled a motor down and found that case was buggered. So the motor that was going to be used, that was running, stayed in. That we got it going, but then decided I was going to have to pull it down. And I said, well, I'll have to pull it down. I won't go to day of the Volkswagen. And Boris, who owns Volkscare, said, no. You get it to me the day after day of the Volkswagen. I'll measure it all up, machine it, and then you can put it together. You'll be right. So we drove to day of the Volkswagen. First time ever I'd had a car I'd actually pretty much restored. It still didn't have carpet in it, but everything else, and the seats hadn't been done. But, all painted and outside looked really good. And then came home, disassembled the motor, ordered all the bits, got it all in. And then Boxing Day, so remember the wedding's February, Boxing Day, Michael, my old boss, came up and we started to assemble the motor, and then found that the bearings we'd gotten from the US, because we couldn't get bearings in Australia at the time, one of them was first oversize and the rest were all standard. I was like, oh, no. And so Michael's like, nah, it's all right. I'll go home. I'll see if I've got any in my spare box of bits. And he had a standard bearing that we needed. I think it was a main or a big end. I can't remember which. Anyway, and then came back, assembled the motor. And then so the whole of January was spent, every time we went somewhere, was drive somewhere to run the car in to make sure that it was right, because it had not been driven at all. So it had literally got rego the Thursday before day of the Volkswagen on the Sunday. And yeah, run it in, bed it in. And then, come the day to go to Fraser Island, off we go. And Harrison, my eldest, sat in the back seat. We thought that, he won't last all that long in the back. He'll have to go into Nicole's car at some point, because it was summer for us, our summer. So it was stinking hot. Up in Queensland, 35 degrees, 100% humidity, pretty warm. In Victoria, there was like coming Florida, back, it was like, yeah, very much. 40 degrees in Melbourne sometimes. So, yeah, it was pretty warm. But no, Harrison stuck in the backseat of the Beetle the whole way. He did complain. I remember at one point, twice he complained. The first time was driving to up there the first day. We're sort of left at 4 a.m. And he's like, Daddy, it's cold, because I hadn't connected the heaters. I was like, well, put your blanket over you, mate. And then another time he got grumpy and he's like, Daddy, turn the Beetle down, too loud.
Yeah, sorry, kid.
This is it, mate. Get used to it. But yeah, it was a case of, because we were convoying. We had Nicole in a separate car, in a modern car with her parents, and Lockie, our middle child. And it was a case of I'd leave first. And at some point during the day, they'd pass me, because, I could do 100, but that was about it with a 36 horsepower. And then they'd pass me waving. We'd meet up. They will have already had lunch. Here's your lunch. Quickly scoff some lunch and go again. And I'd leave before them. And then they'd pass me again. And we did it in 3 days, I think, for memory, drove up there, which is no mean feat. But the second day was horrendous. There was lots of roadworks. It was 12 hours of driving. It was a hard day. But yeah, that was from Canberra to, I think, Port Macquarie, for memory, or something like that, sort of northern New South Wales. But it was a horrible day. Lots of roadworks. It was not a pleasant trip. There was one funny part where we were driving sort of just out of Sydney, and there's lots of road that sort of does this, they call them the roller coasters, because there's some steep hills and some big valleys. And going up the hills, at one point I looked in my mirror and all I could see was my tail lights, the engine lid, and the back window. So what's going on here? And I was in second gear in the left-hand lane trying to get up the hill, because the 36 has got no go.
Yeah.
There was a truck sitting sort of right up my backside because he's trying to do the same thing I am, get up the hill. But I've run out. I've said, mate, I've got nothing. I'm flat to the boards. This is it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's this poor truck behind me trying to get around me. So, yeah, it was fun. That second day was pretty horrible, but it was fun to drive all that way and then to get it up there. It went over on the boat. So Fraser Island, there's a ferry that you've got to go over on.
Okay.
And you can't get over on a bridge or anything like that. So the Beetle, I've got photos of the little Beetle sitting on this ferry with these 4-wheel drives and what have you going over there. So we didn't go into the sort of the island along any of the 4-wheel drive tracks with it.
Sure.
But yeah, taking it over on the boat, that was pretty cool. And it didn't miss a beat. The whole way up there, the whole way back, it just ran like a dream. I did have to adjust the points, I think, in Canberra on the way back. I thought, feels like it's lost what little power it does have. And then just saw the point gap had closed up, but quickly fixed that. And yeah, that was the only thing I had for the sort of the week we were away. And like you said, I think for memory, all up, it was 3,000 miles. So it had a service before I left and it needed a service when it got back. So it was a cool trip. Really cool trip.
Hell of a trip and really cool stories. Thanks for sharing that. So
no worries.
Somebody that grew up all about the air-cooled scene, became a Volkswagen mechanic, obviously living the ultimate Volkswagen life. Now you're learning about these cars and you start dabbling a little bit into water-cooled naturally. That's what you're doing for work. But a part of the story that you had mentioned that was interesting to me was you built a race car. You built an MK1 Golf. So this is interesting. I want to hear, how did this happen?
So in the combi one year, went down to Craig Hughes, the editor of Volkswagen magazine, or VW magazine Australia, organised an all VW drag racing event. My old boss and Andrew Ermel both had drag Beetles, a very quick, naturally aspirated drag Beetles, very cool cars. And I wanted to be a part of the action, but budget wasn't sort of there. And so I went, well, what else is really good? And I remember when I worked for Michael, he'd said to me, he said, Mark 1 Golfs are really good for modifying. They're like Beetles. They're really cool little cars. And I thought, well, all right, maybe we do a Mark 1. And so I bought a very rusty Mark 1 Golf. That, like, it was a Flintstones car. You could see the road through the floor.
Yeah.
But mechanically was really good. So I drove that car for a while, got a dodgy roadworthy on it and drove it on the road for ages, just making sure that mechanically it was all right. But I knew that it was not great. So I kept a lookout for another one, and I found an auto Mark 1, but it had blown the auto. It could go backwards, but it couldn't go forwards. And I either did some research or Michael had told me that it was very easy to convert Mark 1 from an auto to a manual. And so in my grandmother's garage, I didn't own a house at the time. We had a rental, so I didn't want to do any mechanical work there. So in my grandmother's little single car garage, I hired an engine crane and sat and converted, basically made one good car out of two okay cars. and similar story. This happened all before the Beetle, but similar story to the Beetle in that I got this Beetle sorted and running, and then drove it to Fraser Island, to Portland, where the all VW drag meet was, which is sort of, I don't know, probably 600-700 kilometers away from home, to do this all VW drag meet. And yeah, went down there in this little Mark 1 Golf, dead stock little Golf, but had a great weekend. There was another Mark 1 and I that we just did pass after pass on the 8th mile drag racing circuit. We had an absolute ball. We were just having so much fun. And then it was hilarious because we did that, and then I actually made it into the final, the water-cooled final. And yeah, unfortunately though, so it was bracket racing where you dial in your time, and then you've got to meet that time. You can't go any quicker than that. And I'd been doing, I think it was 11 seconds all weekend, the whole weekend, I think, over the 8th mile. I think my figures might be off. I can't remember. And I thought, okay, well, I'll dial in that time for the final. And I went, and I remember looking in the mirror and thinking, I was up against a Golf 3. I think from memory, it might have even been a VR6. So really nice car.
Those sound great. I love the way those sound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great note. And yeah, I looked in the mirror and thought, oh yeah, I've got her beaten. Cool. Will I back off? No, I haven't gone over 11. I haven't gone under 11 all weekend. I'll be fine. No worries. Anyway, I got through and found out that I'd actually gone quicker than 11 seconds. So she won the race and I was runner up. But it was a great weekend. It was so much fun.
Yeah,
It was
like
cool.
it. Did you ever feel at any time during ownership of this, did you ever feel for a second like you're betraying the air cooled roots, or was it just as cool and right on past it?
I think it was just as cool because I still had a Beetle and I had the combi and I had the Beetle I've got now at the time. So the Beetle hadn't been restored yet. So at no point did I feel like I'd completely left the air cooled side. Sure. It was just supplementing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it still had the right badge on the grill. So that helped. And yeah, they were fun. The thing for me is I found that parts were hard to get a hold of, like particularly interior parts and that sort of stuff. So it became a little bit frustrating in that respect. So that was why I lowered it. It was lowered with a set of coilovers.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have put a Golf 3 injected motor in it. That would have made it go really nicely. But yeah, it was just becoming too hard with parts, and rust was an issue. And I'm not someone that my welding's okay, but it's not great. So I decided that, yeah, I'd let someone else take that one on. And because too, I had the Beetle that I wanted to sort out. It went. But yeah, the Mark 1s are a great little car. And I still have a bit of a soft spot for them. They're fun. They're a funny story on that Mark 1 too. I remember one night we had there's 3 sets of traffic lights that are really close together. And at the third set, the left-hand lane runs out. And this guy pulled up next to me and I thought, I'm not going to let you get in front of me. Why are you trying to push your way in front of me? So I took off from the lights and did that great. And it was not long after the Portland drags. I hadn't washed the car yet, so it still had rubber up the sides of the wheel wells. And so I took off like a bat out of hell and grabbed second gear and thought, how cool is that? And we've over here in Victoria, we have what's called hoon laws. So if you drag race on the road, or you spin your wheels or do donuts or anything, and the police catch you, you can lose your car. They'll take your car or impound it for 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And so I did this and took off and left the car for dead. And I thought, how good was that? And then next thing, woo, the police pulled me over. There was a cop car behind me that I didn't see. And he greeted me with, how would you like to lose your car? And I looked at him, I said, I don't really want to, but I've got a feeling I'm going to. And thankfully he let me off on a warning. But yeah, they're great little car Mark 1s. They're very cool. So especially those little, I never had one, but those little GTIs, those first GTIs, they're
I never had one. I had 2 buddies that had the GTIs back in my high school days, and yeah, they were pretty cool cars. Me and my circle, we've always been Volkswagen fans. So you got the 3 boys.
Yep.
You told us the stories about how they'd rather ride in the classic car than
100%.
the nice new cars. Yeah. Do you think that your boys are gonna carry on the tradition? I talk to a lot of guests that I have on the show, and that's something that we touch on. Is it's kind of up to us, to make sure to ensure
100%.
These kids. Do your kids, are they interested?
Look, at the moment, I think that for them, sport is everything. They're into. My eldest son is going to Japan playing baseball. So he's focusing on baseball. My middle son plays baseball in summer and plays Australian rules football in winter. So he adores that. And my youngest, certainly he's probably the most vocal about going in the Combi or the Beetle or my wife's old Commodore. He loves the old cars. But I think the other 2 do too. Certainly Lachlan, the other day we were at the zoo and someone was using a 2-stroke post hole digger. And Lachlan turned to me and said, oh, geez, Dad, I really like that smell. And I said, yeah, it's a good smell, isn't it, mate? I love the smell of 2-stroke in the morning. And excuse me. So yeah, I think I think that they're interested, but at this point, sport's probably more interesting for them. But it's certainly, I don't push it. I don't force it upon them.
Yeah.
But I nurture it is probably the best way to put it, you know?
Well said. Well said. Same thing for me. I don't, like I'll put them, I'll take pictures with my kids and stuff. And, like just last year we did some graduation stuff and we took the 71 Carmen Gia out to the water and, set it up and all cleaned up. And, it was like the background for a lot of these 16, 17-year-old kids. It was it was like the coolest thing ever for them. And I'm like,
yeah.
So you guys think this is cool? And they're like, yeah, hell yeah. I'm like,
yeah.
My job, I feel like it's, well played because that's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah, 100%.
But I'm not gonna force it. If they don't interested and they want something that's got AC and all that stuff, hey man, well power to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't like driving like that, but I do now. I have it's both my classic cars are not my everyday drivers.
No, I fought it for a long, long time. You asked before whether I was betraying the mark by going to a Mark 1 Golf. Yeah, it's probably the fact that I drive a 2017 TDI Golf now every day that makes me feel that hurts a little bit. But the distances I drive from the Dandenong Ranges to the city every day, so it's about 50 kilometres each way, 100K round trip. To my work. So my wife said, if you're going to do that, you are not to drive the combi every day. So I've gone to a modern car, but sometimes I've got to just go in the old ones to clear the head and have a bit of fun.
Sure. Let's touch on that. Let's touch on that. The ultimate dream. I ask every guest that comes on this question, and I love the answer so much. So money, no object at all. What's the ultimate dream? What's the ultimate dream build for you?
This is really hard because I think if money was no option, I've got to be honest, I think I'd be like Jay Leno. I think I'd have hundreds of cars. And not just V-dubs. Money no option. Well, I could get that James Bond DB5. I could get. But for a Volkswagen. Look, there's a couple. There's a 51 crotch cooler. I love those. That'd have to be an original as built. Yeah, and if it's got a sunroof, even better. Yeah, that's sort of the ultimate Beetle. Then, there's also, I'd love another mid-60s Beetle, but this time, like a Cal Resto or a Cal Look Beetle, so the big 2-litre motor in it,
Man.
That nice, that rate stance, something like that. Then there's still the splitties in there as well. That's up there.
Okay.
And then even you mentioned your 181 before. Even for me, we had something in Australia called a country buggy, and a country buggy was developed over here with leftover bits and pieces for the Australian government as a sort of like a Jeep, and they never took it on. And so Volkswagen Australia produced, I think, maybe 800. I might be off on my figures, but I can't remember. They were very low production, but they're a very cool Australian-only thing. So, something like that. Yeah, I honestly couldn't pick anything, and that's the hard part. So, I don't know if I've answered it well enough, but there you go.
You did. You everybody's able to envision what you talked about and what you dreamed about. And I think that's the best part.
Yeah.
I'm right here with you. Look, man, this has been awesome. It's been a blast. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
No worries. Thank you.
I'd love to connect with you. That's a wrap for this episode of DubLife Diaries. Thanks for riding along with us and diving into these incredible stories of the people in the dubs that drive their dreams. If you love today's episode, don't forget to subscribe or hit that follow button so you never miss an adventure. Do you have a story to tell or know somebody else who's living the dub life? Awesome. Reach out to us. You can find us on all socials at DubLife Diaries or shoot me an email. I'm not hard to find. DubLifeDiaries@gmail.com. Until next time, keep the engines humming and the wheels turning and always follow the road that inspires you. This is Joe Person. I'm signing off. I'll catch you on the next ride.